Have you ever practiced brush strokes, drills, or technique swatches, but when you go to paint, it still doesn't translate? You're not doing anything wrong. It usually just means you're practicing in a way that isn't connected to what you actually struggle with. In this video, I'll show you how to practice watercolor in a way that does translate so you can start to see real progress. My name is Jessica, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's go ahead and get started. What you likely need is not more practice drills, but instead to start working on the project itself. Now, rather than taking the risk of working on your final piece, we're going to practice a single petal, focusing on the technique that's either new to you or that you're maybe struggling with so that you're feeling confident when you come into your final piece. Now, of course, this works on any painting, not just flowers. Here you can see I taught you some feather techniques that you might want to practice before you come directly into your bird. But today we're going to work on a single petal for this amaryllis. Now you'll want to do your practice on the same quality of paper that you're going to be doing your final piece, simply because those techniques, the way the water, the brushes, everything behaves, are going to then transfer when you work on your final piece. And so I am using Arch's 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. So you could do this at any point during your painting. You could do this at the beginning. If you don't feel 100% confident, you can do it halfway through if you're struggling. So what we're going to do is just trace one petal from this outline. This amaryllis outline is available on my Etsy shop, but you can watch the entire tutorial for this for free on YouTube. I'll include the link for you, so you can watch that if you would like. But we're going to just take this one petal and we're going to just practice technique on it. So I can see right through here, this is a thin piece of paper I printed this on, so I can see where that petal is. And so I'm just going to go ahead, take a 6B pencil, scribble on it, but you can also do whatever tracing technique works for you. If you have a light box, use a light box, or if you'd rather draw your petal, you can absolutely draw. I'm doing this tracing just because it will save a little bit of time. So I'm going to go ahead, lay this down, take my pencil, and very quickly get myself the outline. And the reason that you want to have an accurate petal shape is so that it's going to actually help you with the techniques that you're going to be practicing right on the petal. You don't want to just draw any old petal shape. You might find the techniques change a little bit depending on, or maybe the way you need to move your wrist, your hand, whatever, will change depending on the way the petal itself looks, the actual petal, not just a petal. So it's a little light, I'll quickly darken it. Those creases and folds are more just for a little bit of guidance. You don't want them to be too dark. We want to create these with our watercolors, so I'm going to kind of lightly erase. I don't want them to be too bold. And I'm just using my kneadable eraser to do that. Now it is helpful to identify the technique where you're wanting to practice. I think a common area of struggle is wet on damp, and so that's what I'm going to use today. If you were struggling with wet on wet, you could definitely practice your wet on wet technique, whatever it is you're struggling. This particular flower was a challenge. It had a lot of wet on damp and then a little bit of wet on dry, but a lot of wet on damp detail. I'm not going to take you through all the steps. When I painted this particular flower, again, you can go watch that video. I got the purpley tones on here first, the values, as well as these greens. Later, we'll talk about when you should build up layers before you practice the technique you want to practice, but because my initial layers were so light, we can just ignore them all together while we practice and save ourselves a little time. So we're going to go wet on damp. Now, I personally, for wet on damp, find these Simply Simmons brushes helpful because when I apply the water, they allow me to get that water on there, like in a way that definitely still saturates the paper, but it's perfect for being able to lift out a little bit of excess water. They hold less water, but they also work really, really well for soaking out water. I'm pretty sure there's other brushes that would work for this as well. These are just super cheap, easy for anybody to access. I got mine at Michael's, and so I think they're pretty accessible to most people. I'm just gonna tap a little excess water off my brush. I can just soak it out a little bit. Again, like I say, this one is perfect for soaking out excess pigments. And I'm coming directly in to the technique that we want to talk about, and that's our wet on damp. First thing I would suggest if you're struggling with wet on damp is make sure your brush is not too wet. I'm tapping this area closer to the ferrule. I'm leaving the pigments at the tip of the brush. Let's just take a little go and see how it works. It's acting pretty wet. It's blooming, but it is working. You can see I'm getting some nice, beautiful lines here. We are at a nice damp stage. This is actually working quite well. So just going to go along here and just fill this in with some of these little details. Sometimes I recommend you go a little lighter at the beginning these are actually working quite well. This damp is working nicely. If it's not working nicely for you, you can give your paper a minute more to dry. You can also tap your brush off and you can kind of guide these around. Like if you're getting a little bit of a goofy bloom or things are a little bit runny looking, you can always come with your damp brush. Just clean the edges up ever so slightly. But I honestly think these actually worked almost too good to be true. So I might do a little bit more practice over here if I'm having too easy a time of this, because I want you to see me deal with a little bit of struggles too, so that you can handle the struggles yourself when they come. But I'm going to guide that around with my damp brush. And you can see I've got some really reasonably good wet on damp details. And part of the reason was just it had the perfect amount of dampness here. And that's a matter of how wet or dry your paper is. That's affected by how much water you actually apply in the first place, which I say the brush is affected, timing matters, and even the type of watercolor paper you're using. I'm going to show you as well how to add a few details. If you're struggling to have a nice sharp tip, you can come into your paint, get that paint loaded, and then pinch your brush a bit. So it's kind of got like more like a chisel tip like that. You can try that. So we'll go with that and see if you are struggling, if this makes anything easier. So I'm going to come in and do a few more of these little creases and folds. And my paper's actually a little wet still because I kind of had come in here before, and you can see I'm getting more of these little details. That's actually working okay too. I'm going to come down here, add a few more. And over here, it's starting to get dry. And if you find some of your details are too crisp at the edges, maybe your paper is drying too much, you can come back over it with a second brush, and I'll get my second brush wet, or I should say damp, and I can use that to just soften things a little bit if I find my details are getting a little bit too crisp or too hard edged. Things are getting a little flowy here, and so this is an opportunity to let it dry for a minute, and then, okay, up here it's a little too dry, soften it with my brush. Some people might actually prefer to just paint a little bit more wet on dry and then soften with a damp brush. That is an option, but I do like this wet on damp whenever I can achieve it. So I'm going to come in here and see where things are at, because every second makes a difference in terms of the wetness and dryness of your paper. And this is working. I'm not as saturated. My brush doesn't have as much paint. Put a tiny bit more on. Let's try a few more of these details. I'm going to admit the dampness on my paper feels like almost exceptionally good. And some of that does have to do with climate, timing. There's so many factors. You can have days where it's just like, okay, that worked too easy. So I might go ahead and just repeat it. I'm going to just sketch one more petal over here because I want to show you a few more things, because I want to help you troubleshoot, because I think this is a common struggle, and that made it look too easy. So let's try it again and see if I can show you a few of the struggles you might face along the way. So I'll just quickly sketch this one in this time instead of tracing, but I'm still trying to really aim for the same shape of petal if I can. No, I'm not being perfect, but the exact way these creases and folds are behaving is really what we want to be practicing, right? So that we feel confident when we actually go to our final painting. We know what angle we're going. We know how we need to be moving our wrists and our hands to get this working. We want to work on muscle memory almost as we do this. And that's where getting the same shape as whatever petal you're wanting to get practice on is helpful. Okay, so I'm going to show you what happens if I'm too wet. So I'm not going to control the water as much this time, because I'm thinking a common problem is people are going to be too wet. So let's just drown this one a little bit. So I'm going to soak a bit of the water out, because like seriously, this is way too drowning to even show you what I want to show you. But okay, so I'm going to show you a couple other things that could be helpful. So number one, let's just show you a quick little demonstration of a little bit too wet, because I think that's common. Most people have this wet on damp where it's too wet. And as they paint, you're gonna more than likely, if you're too wet, this is what's gonna happen to you. You can see it just flowed almost too much, which is fine. It's pretty if you want that effect, but it's just like, okay, I'm getting my creases and folds a little bit wonky compared to what I'm actually after in the photo, right? They are changing, doing a little bit of different things, but you get the point of what's happening with my paint. I'm definitely having like everything just going everywhere. If that happens to you, you can do a couple things. You can just like wash it all out by like, I'll show you that. First, you could try this. You can try damp brush clean things. So I'm like soaking the excess up and tapping it on my paper towel. That's one option for yourself. If you feel like might be able to control it by doing this, or something you think is worth keeping with your original lines. If you're not happy, it's also an opportunity. You can kind of just do a little of this and wipe those out a bit, tap them off with a paper towel, and try it again. And those lines that are there aren't terrible. You could wash them out even further by scrubbing, but you could just go, okay, you know what, I'm going to leave those there. They're not terrible. And this time you're going to soak more water out. You can also, instead of soaking the water out with this brush, you can just let it sit for a minute. But I kind of like just the control I have by getting a nice, even, damp, almost you could say wash, a damp wash, by using a brush with a little more firmness. And let's try the difference that it makes when we come in with that firmness. I do have a slightly smaller brush than I used last time. This is my number 6 Simply Simmons. Like that. You can see the change it makes by being more damp, right? Let's see, I can even kind of ignore some of the lines I messed up earlier and kind of go over them and get them working a little nicer and see the difference it made. And that's helpful. This tip is fairly sharp on the brush. If you get little here's another common problem too, is these little blooms. Maybe you've got too much water on your brush. You might get a little star at the end. Okay, too much water on the brush. I didn't even get the star at the end. I just got these really fat lines. You can see it, little bloom there. Too much water on the brush. So what we're going to do, once again, lift some of that out. So you can see either if your paper's too wet or your brush is too wet, you're going to run into trouble. Things are just not working as well. And so that's why we call it wet on damp. Both your brush will generally be fairly damp and your paper will be fairly damp. But you can see not all is lost. I'm kind of cleaning that out. Not perfectly, but good enough. And then I can come back in, tap my brush off. So again, we're a little bit more on the damp side. And then come in and do these little details. I'm almost too dry up here. You can see those details are staying a little bit hard-edged. This is where you might want to soften things. You might feel just more confident. You might be so happy you got things working. You're like, no, I'm not softening. I'm just going to leave it like that. That's okay too. I would be inclined, if things are getting a little too hard-edged, to soften. But it's not bad. It does have a hint of softness to it. So you can decide if you want to soften things as they get a little bit on the harder side. But I want to show you one more thing, and that is sometimes a smaller brush could be helpful. The smaller brushes also give you control, and they naturally hold less water. This is a softer brush. Softer brushes hold more water, but the smaller the brush is, naturally the less water it's going to be able to hold. And so even though it's a softer brush, you might just prefer working with a smaller brush that holds less water. So let's see how that goes. And this is something you're going to have to experiment for you and see what works for you. See how much better that's working. So you might discover the softer brush is just fine as long as you're small. Have a small brush. Again, you can always tap it off if you've got too much water. But that's a little bit of troubleshooting to help you. And the best way to troubleshoot, I would say for yourself, is to practice on just a small little petal, and so that you get comfortable with what you're working on. And you can see I just went and botched this down here. If you look at the reference, you're like, yeah, Jessica, you really didn't follow the reference. And I so didn't. I just kind of got crazy with my lines here, and so I didn't follow the reference photo. We can clean that out. As you can see, it's supposed to be like just kind of like no pink down there, right? It's green. You can see I get carried away sometimes. It's not the end of the world, but I wanted you to kind of get a little bit of experience with other options for yourself as you're working along here and you're struggling. You know, there's options. You can try a different brush and change the wetness of your brush and the wetness of your paper, all those things together. And the best way to figure that out is to just play on a small piece of paper. And don't use this as a guide for how to paint that particular amaryllis petal, because it looks pretty funny. But in case that's you and you've ever had that problem. Now, I would never do this. Just if I was practicing and I realized I botched something, I probably wouldn't fix anything. But if I was actually working on my actual petal, I would use something like this brush. This is a shader brush, a little more firmness to it. I would probably try scrubbing at it a little bit like so, and then tapping it out with another piece of paper towel. See if I can lift a little of that pink out. I'm not too worried. This is a practice page. And that lets you see that we all kind of make mistakes. And like I say, I will link the full tutorial for this. It is free if you want to follow along. I also have another one. This particular tutorial will guide you through different techniques for wet on wet, wet on damp, and wet on dry as I paint these two flowers, and I kind of take different approaches with them, give you lots of ideas. So you can see there's more than one way to approach a single flower. You can see they almost look the same as each other by the end, but I use slightly different approaches. You can find the approach that works for you, because you might find one works better for you in this season of your journey. You might find just your personality resonates with one way of painting than another. So you might like that tutorial. I'll link it as well. Again, free on YouTube. And finally, my newest tutorial on Etsy, I show you some of these same wet on damp techniques. I'm using them in this petal and this petal. You can kind of see it throughout this flower, but definitely another opportunity for you to play with wet on damp if that's something you enjoy. Or you would just like some more practice with that. And you might even find this tulip is more approachable than the amaryllis. Now, as I mentioned, I was able to practice these techniques without getting those under layers first, like the greens and the purples. You watch this full tutorial, you'll see the green and purple do come first in this video. But because they were so light, they didn't really influence the way that I would need to practice these. However, there are a few times where the layering does matter. For instance, this is one of my Etsy tutorials. And with this poinsettia, it is so intensely red that any of these details that I'm putting on top of the intense bright red take a slightly different approach because the paint wants to lift. There was a couple tips I gave on this tutorial on how to handle really deep saturated pigments, including using a softer brush. So that is a situation where if I was going to practice one petal, I would definitely layer the undercolor on there, dry it, do the upper layers. And you can find this tutorial if you're interested. This is on my Etsy shop. This tutorial on my Etsy shop has just a little bit of that gentle detail, the wet on wet that we just practiced today. If you're looking for something with just a little bit of wet on damp detail, this might be one that's for you. And I'll include a link for that in case that's something you're interested in. And this petal here, because most of these details are done kind of with a medium value, you probably could just practice those details the same way that we did here without building all your layers up as you do the practice. And then when you actually go onto your final painting, you would build those layers underneath before you come into your detail layers. And so all that to say, when you go to practice a single petal, I would focus on the technique that you're wanting to learn or master, and then just skip all the other layers or details just so you can get this part something you're comfortable with, unless of course you're working with really deep, intense, rich, saturated color, in which case you want to build up some darker layers first, just because you want to also get practice with how things are going to lift. And now just to finish up today, I'm going to show you how you can add just a few more details. I'm going to start with wet on damp, and then I might even show you a little bit of wet on dry. But let's get started with wet on damp. So I'm just going to go ahead and wet this entire petal first. And I'm going to do the small brush technique over here now because I'm just going to do a few details. So let's see how this goes. I'm pretty dry, and I'm just going to see how these details land on here. Yeah, they're behaving, I think. I think we're wet, or I should say damp enough. And I'm just going to add a few more of those details. You can always, too, change the position of your rest, your paper, move your paper around and find whatever position is the most comfortable for you. There is not any need to keep your paper upright while you paint. You can definitely paint upside down, sideways, whatever you need to do to make your details work out for you. Sometimes it helps with the wrist positioning and all the rest. You can see it's blooming a little bit. Not bad. I'm slightly losing my softer pinks here, so I'm just going to softly kind of blend just a little bit along here. There we go. And I'll just drop in a few more details. It's going to be more wet here because I just added that more extra water, and I'll get a little softer effect, which is what I'm after for in that area. And then finally, I'm going to show you wet on dry, just in case you're really struggling with the wet on damp. I'm going to show you how to get as close as possible to the wet on damp effect without having to work wet on damp, and that is to soften your edges. So I'm going to use the second brush. This is my number 6 Simply Simmons. It's loaded with, I should say not loaded, it's wet or slightly on the damp side. Tap it off a little. And I'm just going to do a few details over here. So I'm going to come in here, and you can see I'm perfectly dry. Whoops. I'm botching the shapes of my details a little, but I'm working dry, wet on dry, and then I come in and soften. I try and soften fairly quickly. You may need to soften before you do quite as many little lines as I did. That was quite a few lines to do and then soften. Easier to do a few at a time, or even one at a time. You can see I'm able to get not bad effects. It's not quite the same as working wet on damp. Okay, you can see I keep washing and drying my brush as I do this, as I'm softening. So this is my water brush, and this was my paint brush. They're both paint brushes, but the one with water on it, I'm using it to kind of get that look of a soft edge, and yet I applied the paint wet on dry, and then I'm just softening it. So you might find that easier if you're starting out and you're really struggling with that damp technique, but I would recommend really give it a try with a firmer brush and just practice on a simple petal until you feel happy with your technique. Then you can transfer it to your final painting. And I think you'll find this approach to practice to be incredibly valuable for your progress as an artist, as well as your success with each individual painting. Anytime you come across a new technique or something that just feels a touch challenging, just go ahead, practice one petal or one technique using those exact same movements that you're going to want to apply in your final piece. As I mentioned, I'll include links to the videos I talked about today. I'll include those in the description box below so that you can practice wet on damp techniques. But in the meantime, I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!